Hello, everyone, and welcome to season 5 of the Empowering Women podcast. It is 2023, and it still feels incredibly weird to say that, but here we all are. It is another year to live our dreams and our best life. And speaking of living our best life, we are going to kick off 2023 with one of our amazing Empowering Women in Industry community members. She was one of my partners in crime at the recent conference in October. So Lauren Dreher is a mindset speaker. She is the author of Go With Your Gut, Then Keep Going. And she's also the host of the podcast, Go With Your Gut. So we have a professional here. She is the perfect guest to help us kick off this year with an absolute bang and achieve more than we ever thought possible. So welcome, Lauren, to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is like girl time for a little bit. This is great. So I know you, Lauren, obviously, but can you tell our listeners a little bit more about your story?
Absolutely. So as Shannon said, my name is Lauren Dreher, and my background is actually in family studies and human services. So I've always kind of been the people helper type. But after I graduated, I had a couple of jobs, and it was always hey, here's a paycheck, but not really where I'm supposed to be. And I kind of always knew that. Well, the other thing to know about me is I grew up with facial scars since about the time I was 7 because I had some birthmarks removed. And while I was sitting at one of those jobs, and y'all, I worked at home before it was cool to actually do that. So I was sitting at my desk thinking, okay, this is not where I'm supposed to end up. So where is that place? What could I do? And I ended up deciding I wanted to be a speaker. And I'm like, all right, well, that's a leap, but let's see what's going on. And I was like, well, I guess I have a good story. And I decided that I wanted to help women develop the confidence from the inside out and get past, whatever imperfections they had on the outside. So that gave me a nice deep dive into my own development journey. And that is where my ultimate passion for just mindset in general and really how it can change your life, because you start with one thing and honestly it bleeds into every aspect of your life, right? And the things that I have been able to change in my life, including myself, and from what I've been told, the people around me, it's been one heck of a journey. And with that, I wrote a book, as Shannon told you, and I've kind of just gone wherever I've felt the need to go. And most of it I have no background in, which is exhilarating and terrifying all at the same time. But here we are.
Here we are. That's right. Well, Lauren, it's funny. This is completely off topic, but I also had some birthmark surgery when I was 7, 8 years old. Mine's on my leg. So you and I need to share, I need to swap stories at some point. So yeah, I've been not in a similar boat, but it sounds like on maybe a similar journey. So that's really interesting. Yeah. And we're so glad that you're here, because I totally agree that mindset can really change your trajectory for the better. So on that note, I'm a little late to the party on this one, but I recently became aware of the 2018 Barnard commencement speech and the corresponding book by Abby Wambach. And the book, and I'll put this in the show notes, the book is entitled Wolfpack: How to Come Together, Unleash Our Power, and Change the Game. And in this book and in her speech, she talks about 8 rules that will help you change the game. And rule number 1 is you were always the wolf, create your own path, which I just absolutely love. So admittedly, I think many of us just fear and are terrified, you just use that word, of creating our own path. So I had a couple questions for you regarding that statement. How do you think we envision a future for ourselves that gets us excited, kind of gets us over that fear hump?
I think it starts by letting ourselves dream, because
Mm.
we don't honestly do that enough. And when I say that, kind of like what I was talking about a minute ago, dream about the things that seem absolutely freaking crazy to you, and dream about what it would look like. Where would you be? And it doesn't have to be limited to where you are in your career path. Like, I mean, this is totally different from what I was doing, but I was like,
Yep.
okay, this sounds fantastic and like a challenge, which, most everybody, I should say, loves a challenge. But what would you do if you didn't have any limitations? And um when I originally did this, I wrote a list, and it consisted of, I think, 6 or 7 things that, if all everything aside,
Right.
what can I do? And on that list was, it was a private chef and a speaker, is what the last two came out to where I was like, well, okay, this is realistic for me, maybe. And so I went to my mother, who is my optimist and my realist, and I was just like, okay, am I crazy? Am I absolutely nuts for doing this? She's like, no. But when I really thought about those things and, what they could look like, I started learning to listen to my body.
Mm.
And that's kind of where it started for me, because those other things were just kind of like, yeah, okay, this would be kind of cool. This would be interesting. And yes, a challenge. But when obviously I went with the speaker part, but when I thought about that being a speaker part, I got this like
Mm.
nervousness. And when I say nervousness, that included um being terrified, being excited, having absolutely no idea where that would go or how I would get there. But I was excited about it.
Yep.
And for the first time, that didn't completely mentally paralyze me, because can always see the bigger picture, but getting there, those small steps have always stopped me in my tracks and maybe be like, yeah, nope, not doing that. And this is the first time that I was like, all right, I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'm going to get there somehow.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about the speaker. So I've done a lot of things on stage over my life. Like I took dance as a child, but I'll never forget the first, I would call it, true professional speaking engagement that I accepted. And it wasn't a paid engagement. It was actually on behalf of my company, but it was at a pretty large conference. And funny enough, it was in Canada, and I'd never actually been to Canada before. And it was this French speaking part of Canada, not the English speaking part of Canada. But what was funny is I was terrified, and it wasn't a stage really, but it was a proverbial stage. And I
Yeah.
was terrified. I was like, why in the world did I sign up to do this? But it was that I've heard it described as butterflies. And to
Oh,
your
yeah.
point, like I got up there and then I was completely in the zone, the
Yeah.
flow that a lot of athletes talk about. And I was like, this is
Yeah.
it. Like I get really nervous. But I love to do this. Like I love inspiring people and talking about like my journey, and maybe that can help them on their journey. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And, that butterfly feeling you talk about, I I think everybody gets that. And honestly, I feel like there's a problem if you don't,
Yep.
because I don't know why, but I feel like it's a problem. But I feel like that kind of, unless you know kind of how to handle it and you practice moving through that, it almost puts you in that like terrified stage. And then if you're anything like me, it almost makes you go blank and you're just like, oh my God, I just forgot everything I'm going to
Yeah.
say. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've been practicing this for 6 months, but what? I don't know. And being able to recognize that and saying, I've practiced this so many times. I could probably do it in my sleep. I've got this. And learning how to calm your body down and not let your mind and that anxiety and fear take over,
Yep.
because to me, that's always that's the self-doubt coming out in me of, can I do this? Do I deserve to be here? Yes and yes.
Yep. But I think that was going to be my next question. So you're leading in beautifully, Lauren. I'll send you the check later, which is, what do you think gets us in the way of setting our own path? And I think you just, in your own way, answered that. It's fear. It's how does fear and self-doubt show up for you? You want to say any more about that? How it shows up for you, or any other about that?
So yes, fear, absolutely. And fear looks different for absolutely everyone. And once you think you have it conquered, it will find a new way to be like, haha, you're funny.
I'm still here.
Logic for those of us who want to overthink everything, if you know where I'm going with that. And
Me.
we want to put ourselves or keep ourselves in a box of what we think we should do, instead of being like, hey, like, this is awesome. Like, look what I can do. And even if you don't feel 100% confident, nobody knows that but you. And I get told this all the time by my Toastmasters mentor is, go out there and have fun with it, because
good point.
Usually you've got the presentation and the content ready of what you want to say, but it's adding your personal touch to it. And that's where you kind of let loose and then get in the zone that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. So everybody on this podcast knows I'm a complete TED nerd, and I love to watch TED Talks. It's really insane how much I like to watch them. But the really good ones, the reason that we're drawn to them is because they feel like they're having a conversation with us, while that content may be in their head. And quite frankly, they might have screwed up half of it from their original document. You don't know that because they're having a conversation with you. And to your point, Lauren, they're authentically themselves in that moment.
Yeah. And, there's such a expectation of whatever we're doing of, we have to do this perfectly. And I get that. And I think that also comes from how some people were raised. But I am kind of a huge advocate of, nobody can relate to perfection.
Yeah.
And I went to a local TEDx event here in Kansas City, and I loved it because one of the guys stood up there and you could just tell he was nervous. He was talking quick, which a lot of people do.
I do that too.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, you can hear me doing it, but
where's Karen Laus when you need her? She needs to teach me how to slow down.
But one thing I loved is that he just stopped and was like, guys, I'm really nervous. And to do that and call yourself out on it during a TEDx talk, that gave me such respect for him, because I was just like, that makes him a person. And he got a huge round of applause for it. And I love
what courage. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny. Another rule that Abby talks about in this book is make failure your fuel. And when I first read that, I was like, what is she thinking? Like, I don't watch women's soccer, but I know she's hyper competitive. And she starts talking about making failure your fuel. Any thoughts on that and how you avoid that that perfection mindset?
Oh, so many. So I love that was what she was talking about, because I once did a speech, I don't even know, a couple of years ago now, maybe. And it was, make fear your friend. And how do you do that? And first of all, it's a shift in your mindset, because we are taught to think of failure as a bad thing, and that,
Mhm.
you know, if you fail, it's just like that you're supposed to be hard on yourself
And you're like,
and
oh, I
put
can't believe
yourself
I just screwed
down.
up, right?
Right. And it's like this big red word, I feel like, that we put such a stigma on, when honestly, it should be the complete opposite, mostly because we started failing when we were babies, because we all learned to walk, talk, we learned to do everything. And how do we learn to walk and talk? You fall on your butt quite a bit, right? And how do you learn to do anything is you start. Most of the time when we start something, we don't already know how to do it. No matter how many times you watch somebody, when you actually do it, you're just like, wait, what did they do? Where was this? Right? Whether it's learning a new like software platform or whatever that looks like. And the only way I have figured out how to work through fear is to get yourself out of that dang comfort zone as much as you can, and do it intentionally, because making fear not have that stigma and making it your friend, in my
Yeah.
case, it's kind of like a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets. And the more we practice, the more you practice anything, the better you get at it. So I just read a book. I don't remember the name of it, but it was all about um, neuroscience and how we um, how we make neural pathways out of mindset. And
Mm.
I mean, that was right up my path, right?
Yeah, I
But
bet.
he talked about um, the more you do it and the more you become comfortable with it, kind of like anything else, you get better at it, but it creates new neural pathways.
Yeah.
So when you change your mindset about fear and about being uncomfortable, all of a sudden you're like, oh, this isn't really so uncomfortable.
It's
And
not really as bad as I thought it would be.
I'm
Yep.
actually kind of getting comfortable with it. Gosh dang it. And it
Yep.
it's kind of funny when you do that, because when you shift mindset on that and think, I'm going to be intentional about it, then you start looking for ways to challenge yourself. You start looking for those ways to be uncomfortable. And naturally, you start learning, growing, um, probably, hopefully getting some promotions or growing that skill set. And you naturally make your own path, whatever that looks like.
Yep. It's
But
so true. I'm laughing because I just did an internal, I'm gonna call it speaking engagement. It was to an internal group in my day job. And I've used the term what I call deliberate opportunity, or
yeah,
and I say it's being intentional about those circumstances and what you're taking advantage of. And I what I talk about in that talk is that it takes three things: courage, right? Connection,
yep,
connecting with people and connecting with yourself, and being
yep,
able to create and own your own story. It really takes those three things. But what I love about what you just said is deliberate opportunity. You have to be, and you just got to take that first leap and do something uncomfortable. And it can be something as silly as, I'm going to reach out to somebody on LinkedIn that I've maybe crushed on from afar, and I'm going to send them a note, right? It could be something that simple, but when you start, like the flywheel starts, and then the next brave or uncomfortable thing you do is going to be even bigger than that first one.
yes. And, you know, I am notorious for overthinking like everything. And Like,
You and I
okay,
share
well,
that because I'm an engineer. I can overthink them with a best. I can go down 50 things that can go wrong, and what does the contingency plan
yeah,
need to be? And at some point, you just got to call it.
right. And, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with um, coming up with a plan, with doing some research and knowing kind of where you're intending on going. But at some point, it becomes procrastination,
It does.
and it it becomes you putting the limits on yourself instead of being like, well, okay, I know what this could look like. I know where I want it to look like, but at some point, you just got to take the action and make the scary contact and not be like, well, you know, they don't want to talk to me. They don't want to give me their time. They don't want to do this. And one thing I have very much learned about that is I've always been one to automatically give people an out, automatically give people that door to say, okay, yeah, well, I don't want to give you my time because I'm like, if you don't, if you can't do this, I totally get it. And it was really hard because uh, the people pleaser in me was screaming at me hard and loud. But
Right.
whenever I reach out to somebody now, it's give them the opportunity to say yes. And if they need to say no for whatever reason, they
That's
will.
okay. Yep.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like, hey, can you help me with this? Can we work on this together or whatever it is? But it doesn't have to be this big, scary thing, but give somebody the opportunity to say yes instead of automatically expecting them to say no.
Yep. I totally agree. But yeah, and back on the conversation of fear, I think it's doing that first baby step. And then if
Yeah.
you failed and you failed flat on your face, it's okay. You're going to learn. So I'm going to steal a story from Abby's book. So she talks about, she finally makes it to the women's national team. She's a rookie on the team, and she gets in the
Yeah.
locker room and she's looking around, and on the way out the door, there's a picture. And I think later on they're at dinner, they're at some sort of a social an
Yeah.
event. And she asked him about the picture because the picture is not about their last win or this great accomplishment that the team had. It's their last major loss to one of their rivals. And she's like, I don't understand. And so they're saying, hey, it's our fuel to get better. It's our fuel to be connected with one another, get better as a team. And so you got to your point, make fear your friend, make fear in that failure your fuel. Because if you screwed up, my guess is you learn something. And to your point, it's not a bad thing. It's not a red flag. It's okay. You tried something and it failed. And I love what you say about dreaming, because I think you got to feel this is what I want things to be. But sometimes you just got to get out there and do.
Yeah. Yeah. And getting out there and honestly just doing is terrifying because you have
It's
absolutely
terrifying.
you have no idea how it's going to end up. But one thing that I have learned is, go out, whatever you're going to do, have fun with it. And even if it doesn't go how you think it's going to go, then you tweak
Oh,
it,
well,
you
move on.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm
Yeah,
laughing
you
because we're
move
both
on.
podcast hosts. And I tell this story a lot. Like when Charlie sent me the note, I was like, she's lost her head. And I've told that story several times. But I
Yeah.
think just like getting on that first episode, I was absolutely terrified. And a shout out to Stacey Cassio for being my first amazing guest. But I don't know about you, that first podcast, I was like, hey, my brain starts going, why did I sign up for this? I don't know what I'm doing, but it has been the best ride ever. So I think you just try it and you're going to screw up. And my guess is that I'm a lot better today at it than I was in the beginning of season 3. So you figure it out.
You do. And so to be honest, when I started mine, it took 3 different people to be like, hey, you should start a podcast. It sounds kind of like it would feed into what you want to do. And I'm like, I don't have a background in that. Why would I ever do that? And
Yep.
that seems like a lot of work, a lot of time. I'm right there with you. it has been the greatest outlet, the most fun. And I mean, whether I have somebody on it with me or not, it is so much fun to record and just put things out there, you know?
It's great. Well, and I'm laughing because the same question got asked to me about professional speaking. So I've done a lot with women's organizations internally, and I'd branched out a little bit, and they're like, why don't you do speaking? And I'm like, why? Why would I do that?
Yeah.
So it's funny, often the other people in your life see and encourage you to do the things that you don't see at all.
Yep.
That's really funny.
Yes.
So I had the opportunity, Lauren, the great opportunity, by the way, to see your talk at the Empowering Women conference. So I'm going to do a short plug. The conference is coming on October 5th. If you're planning your development calendar, please pencil it in. It will be the event you don't want to miss. But what I want to get back to is when you did that talk, you mentioned about going with your gut, right? And that's obviously a theme throughout your mindset coaching business. But I can overanalyze with the best of them. You mentioned that. Like, I can take something that's like this big and I can make it that big. So what have you found works for you for following your gut? Because I think a lot of our technical folks that listen to this podcast are going to relate. They're like, oh, well, there's not data and facts, and we got to analyze this 50 ways till Sunday. But at the end of the day, I've learned that my intuition is just as powerful as all those data and facts. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that for our more technical folks out there.
So I'm really excited about this question because it goes back to what I was talking about in that talk. And if you don't know, I am not a technical person. My brain does not work like that. But I interviewed two people who very much work like that. Shout out to Empowering Women's Deila Ray, because she was one of the people that I interviewed, and she was fantastic.
Yeah.
The other one was actually my sister, who is an industrial engineer. She is I believe a director at a branch of Honeywell, and very, very different people, different mindsets, different than me, right? And I have learned to do this because I got really sick of where I was, and I was just like, I'm real sick of doubting myself and feeling like there's something else. And I know a lot of people can relate to that, but they had very different answers that encompass the exact same thing, because I have been one to be like, okay, here's where I am. I know where I want to go. And I'm terrified because I don't know how to get there. I have no idea. I have no idea what those little steps look like. And that has always,
it paralyzes you to the point you made earlier on. Yep.
Yes. But both of them said, I had absolutely no idea where I wanted to go, but I knew that there was a way to get there. And both of them, which Deila runs a independent welding business.
Yeah, I think she's a multi-entrepreneur now. She's an instructor at a local college, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yep. So very different backgrounds and fields as well. But both of them said all I did was I started, going for building different skills, and I took on new projects. I knew there was a way to get there, and I just started doing. And, I think it's the coolest thing that me not being a technical person, both of them having more technical minds than myself, it was essentially the same theory of there was some way to get there. So I just started going with what I was feeling, and I went for it and I will say, and Deila gave me permission to say this on in my speech, so I'll throw this out there. She does not have a background in welding. No, It is very different background. So, switching fields and just going for what you want, like, it doesn't matter who you are or what you're doing, but I call it listening to my gut, but follow that intuition and don't let analyzing keep you from still following that gut, because there's a lot of times that honestly the numbers don't add up, and it's kind of like, well, I have absolutely no idea how this is going to go, and it's probably not logical, but I still want to do this. Follow that piece, because your brain will always tell you how it's going to fail. It will always say, this isn't smart. Why wouldn't you just stay here in your field of expertise? And I mean, my sister stayed in industrial engineering, but Jayla flipped the switch, and now
Yes, she did.
she is a rock star at it,
Yeah.
and she is thriving, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, 3 examples. I never thought that I would be here.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. One of the questions sometimes I'll ask in speaking engagements is, anybody raise your hand that if I asked you 10 years ago, you thought you'd be
Yeah.
right here? And I think
Yeah.
next to nobody raises their hand in the audience, right?
Yeah.
So I love the part where I'm going to start where we started off, which was dreaming. I think
Okay.
you do need to dream. I think you need to think, if I could take away every constraint, what would really make me happy? What would bring me joy? Where do I
Yeah.
think my purpose is? Where can I have impact in the broader world and community? But then you got to step back and say, I'm not going to know all the steps to that. Lauren Widrick, she's a business coach I've worked with. She calls it messy action, right? You just sort of start something. And
Yeah.
like, for example, you might start, I don't know, a LinkedIn group, or you might do a LinkedIn live. And the first one might be like, ooh, that was awful. But you learned, right? It gets back to the failure part. You go, oh, well, it wasn't so bad. I wish it could have been better, but here's what I've learned. This is what I'm going to do differently next time. And I think the thing that I struggle with as an engineer, but I've seen it, is that the life will start unfolding. A very good friend of mine said life will unfold as it should, but I hated that term because it felt like you almost have to let go of control.
And that's the hardest piece. And I struggle with real high anxiety, and
I think a lot of us do. Oh, you're not by yourself. Yeah.
And I need to control like everything. And I can tell when I'm like, okay, Lauren, take some freaking deep breaths and just keep going. But one thing I would say is, and I did a podcast about this maybe a month ago, maybe not that, but it was about labels. And it was all about the labels that we put on ourselves, no matter what that looks like. But I think we put so many limitations on ourselves as to what we shouldn't be able to do in whatever field we're in. So when you say, you know, I'm a very technical person, I'm an engineer, and I think a lot of people do that and they automatically dismiss what they could also do. Because, I mean, I don't have a writing background, but it doesn't take a writing background to type a Word document out and write a book. I don't have technical or production background, but it doesn't take that to start a podcast and just do it. So I think we place a lot of labels on ourselves and automatically dismiss that we can do it. We just have to do it and say, yeah, because when we're like, okay, well, I'm just like this. Well, you may be, but you're also going to be good at a lot of different other things.
It's funny because I think about it too in terms, I don't know if you call them anti-labels, but you say, I am not a speaker. I'm not a podcaster. I'm not a leader, right? But it's probably the same concept, but I think a lot of us will do that. Because if you'd asked me 5 years ago, oh, would you do a podcast? No, I'm not a podcaster. Who does that, right? But it's the same thing. You limit yourself. Yep.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people do that just because they're just like, this is how I think, this is how I do. And when you can take the labels off and take the limitations off of yourself, it's pretty incredible what.
Yeah, that's really powerful, Lauren. I love it. Yeah.
I mean, I've had to do it too. And if you would have asked me even 5-6 years ago, be like, hey, Lauren, you're going to be doing all this and you're going to be stepping into leadership, I'd have laughed. I'd have been like, no, but it's where my life has pushed me. And honestly, I have found that as I've stepped into that, regardless of what it looks like, it has been the most fun and rewarding thing, challenging and terrifying. But I mean, that's kind of the fun of the journey in life and making yourself grow, right?
Yeah, I think I'd summarize it best by saying it's really listening to your calling. And you got to dream first and then start really listening to that calling. So speaking of calling, Lauren, what is calling you in 2023? What are your dreams or aspirations or goals that you can share with our community?
Oh, I got a lot. Hopefully you'll be able to watch me. Hopefully I'll be landing a TEDx talk here shortly.
I gotta hear that. If I can't be there in person, I want the video.
Oh yes. I am working on getting as much speaking engagements as I can because I absolutely love it. I am just looking to serve, and I absolutely love to work with companies and women who, not just women and men, but people who, are feeling stuck wherever they are and like they have absolutely no idea where to go. And I love being able to talk people through that. And I've been through a lot of crap, so that's not hard. But let's see, getting my podcast out there to help people, and my edit of my book is actually in the work. So hopefully that will be finished and hopefully printed here within hopefully the next.
Because I saw you on a LinkedIn Live, so I think you're editing. You had some original, I'm gonna call it aha moments post your initial. So this is sort of the second edition, right? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Okay. There's a lot of different things have happened to me in the past. We'll call it a couple of years. And it was a necessary change because it's been real drastic in my own journey and growth.
Awesome. So I'm going to put a link to the podcast, Go With Your Gut, in the show notes. I will put a link to the book. And then also, just if you're looking for somebody to help you switch it up, switch your mindset, please give Lauren a shout. I know she's fantastic. I've had the incredible opportunity to spend time with her personally. And I know she can kind of help you get out of your own head, which is what a lot of us need sometimes. So as we wrap up, Lauren, I'm going to ask you, what final piece of advice would you want to leave with our listeners?
I would say that nobody can decide what you really want to do and what you want, but you. And honestly, not everybody will understand. And when you start going for what you want, criticism will come. But trust yourself to go with that gut, and then don't stop. Keep going.
Keep going. That's right. Well, thank you, Lauren, so much. I know you're a super busy woman, so I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you for being in my circle, for being my friend and being my supporter. So I really appreciate it. And thank you to our amazing audience. And we will. Oh, go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to say, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been like girl time. I told you it was awesome. So thanks, everybody. I will see you again in our next episode. Thank you for listening.